Hi, Sarah here. Welcome back. I thought it would be interesting and insightful to look at the first 5 decks I got and the latest 5 I also got. It would be interesting to compare, where my tastes were at, where my reading style was at with these first decks, and where my reading style, where my interests are at with these latest 5 decks. So let's take a gander and compare these decks. Okay, so I've laid out my first 5 decks here. Granted, within these 5 decks that I first bought, I actually have sold slash rehomed many decks since then. So honorable mention, I guess, to these decks that I also bought that I don't have anymore. So these are all among the first 5-ish decks that I've bought, but I don't have them anymore. So now these have made the cut. I don't want to spend too much time on each of these decks individually, but I'll try to say a few words about them all and just compare them all as a group. So, first 5 decks that I've got the Way of the Panda Tarot Mini. I've got the Lightseers Tarot. Still love it. I've got the Tarot Renal. I've got the Spacious Tarot here. And I've got the Mystic Mondays Tarot. I see that the theme within these first 5 decks is these are all decks that are honestly pretty easy to read with. They're not too philosophical, too deep thinker. They don't stray too far from the Rider-Waite-Smith format, the Rider-Waite-Smith meanings of tarot. So I feel like this makes sense for what kinds of decks I gravitated towards in my first year, first months of learning tarot. This became my first deck because I was really drawn to the pandas. Honestly, at the time that I bought this deck, I had no idea what tarot was. I feel like if my first exposure to tarot had been like the Rider-Waite-Smith or other medieval looking cards, I probably wouldn't have gotten into tarot. I really love how this deck is also, it's not just a fluffy, mindlessly cute deck. There's a lot of depth in here as well. The messages, they're pretty solid. They have like some backing to them. They're not just toxically positive. They have some reasons for being positive and reasons for helping us push through the things that we need to push through. The Lightseers Tarot and the Mystic Mondays Tarot were both decks that I bought off Amazon. I really don't buy off Amazon anymore if I can help it. These were decks that I bought off Amazon in my first batch of buying tarot. I was so excited to buy tarot that I bought a batch of 5 decks because I just couldn't decide on just one to buy at first. Clearly those 3 are all gone. These 2 have still remained. The Lightseers Tarot, I got lots of recommendations on YouTube on how this was a really good deck for beginners. And after having this, I still have it. I still enjoy at least looking at it. I don't pull it out to read with anymore. I feel like I've kind of outgrown this deck in a way, but I still don't want to rehome it because there's a certain sentimentality that I have with this deck that I will talk about in another video about my sentimental decks. Similar to the Way of the Panda, you can see that there's just a lot of colors, a lot of beautiful colors in this deck here. The colors just really catch my eye and make me want to actually look at the cards. I have had monochromatic decks before. I even had the Prismavisions Tarot, which has like mainly navy backgrounds. That one really didn't work for me. This one works a lot better. Just there's so much color, so much to look at. It's very visually stimulating in a way that's not too overwhelming. And it just has a very modern, almost kind of timeless feel. I know a lot of people really hate this deck. I am not one of those people. I think it's a perfect deck for me to have learned with and to have studied with. This deck really helped me see the versatility of tarot. It helped me see how tarot could be used to take things literally, but also to read into things thematically. So this was such a really cool deck for me to have and enjoy as my first, one of my first decks. I'll talk about this one next, really. Mystic Mondays, again, as the first batch of decks that I bought. This one I also don't read with anymore now because I also feel like I've outgrown this deck. It's really simple compared to these other decks that are more scenic. But I really liked the aesthetic of this. Similar to the other decks, the color palette really drew me in. You can see with all these 5 decks that they're all really colorful. You can tell that I'm a person who really enjoys color. I think the vaporwave-y kind of vibes of this deck was what drew me in. I feel like if I could go back in time, I would tell myself not to buy this deck because it's actually on the chopping block. I take that back. It was a good deck for me at the time. It was fun. I pulled it out for a tarot in practice to try to read with it again a few months ago. Did a whole video about it. I'm just kind of done with this deck. It's not as deep as I'd like it to be. It's on the simple side, and I have other decks that I prefer for their simplicity versus their depth. So I just feel like there's not enough depth for me to want to keep this deck around. What I really like here too is like the contrast of the colors, like the wands being this green and white color in contrast to the background. I really don't know if there's like any meaning to that. I just thought it was visually very cool. I think visually this is one of the most cohesive decks I have ever seen. It just takes some talent, I think, to create a deck that is very thematically and visually cohesive. So 2 indie decks here, Tarot Over Now and the Spacious Tarot. Tarot Over Now was one of the first Kickstarters that I had backed. First Kickstarter ever was the Spread Machine Oracle made by Kim Sun. Second Kickstarter was the Cosmovisions Oracle, where I also bought the Prismavisions Tarot. This was the 3rd ever Kickstarter. I was quickly on the Kickstarter train after getting into tarot, and you know, I don't regret it. It got me really good decks like this one. So this one you can see very similar to The Way of the Panda, watercolors, animal characters, really beautiful scenery, beautiful imagery. 3 years later, this is still a deck that I'm very happy to have. I have never really gotten much into Celia Medvede's other decks. I don't know, for some reason, this is just the only deck that I really click with of hers. And that's okay, you know, I don't have to collect every single deck. I just really love the qualities of this deck. Very open, very scenic. Watercolors are just gorgeous. I really like that there is not no words down here. It just adds to, I don't know, it kind of streamlines the deck a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. This deck just as one of my first 5, it's nice. It's nice. I don't know. It works. The last deck that I'll quickly talk about is the Spacious Tarot here. So Spacious Tarot, I bought this on their website, so not via Kickstarter. I think I just really enjoyed the spaciousness, the expansiveness, the fact that there are no people, no like actors, no characters, except for the court cards in this deck. That really, really worked for me. It brought something different that my other decks didn't have. Like before this, my decks either had animal characters or they had human characters like these here. So all of these decks, they're simple. They're very straightforward to read with. I feel like they don't have like too much detail that I get lost in the details, but there is enough for me to start with. I think what's interesting is that the Lightseer's Tarot, there's a decent amount of detail in here, but the core themes of the cards still feel apparent to me. Similar with this one, or I guess dissimilar, like this one doesn't have as many details as a Lightseer's Tarot, but there are still core themes that still come through. I don't know, it's straightforward to read with, but it's not so obvious that like I can get a card and I can get the answer within 2 seconds. I still have to think about the meanings and the themes of these cards a little bit. That's a quick look at the first 5 decks that I bought in my tarot collection. These latest 5 decks, these are quite different from the first 5 decks that I've bought. So let's take a look. So first up is the Spectral World Tarot. And I've mentioned this a few times in my videos, so I'd be very surprised if you haven't heard this from me yet. In contrast to the other clip in my first 5 decks where I mentioned those decks had very simple cards, very straightforward cards, very easy to read. This deck is clearly the opposite. This is not as straightforward to read because there are a lot of colors that are added to the imagery. Like, let's compare this with the Spacious Tarot. Like, look at this card and this card. This card is so much more streamlined than this card here. But, you know, I'm not here to say that one deck is worse or better than the other. They obviously have their different uses and their different purposes. So I feel like I'm drawn to this deck now because I'm kind of sick of the typical Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. Like typically 6 cups is like a person giving someone else a cup and there's like 6 cups. There's a feeling of nostalgia. I don't see nostalgia apparently in this card. I'm kind of really curious to see like what about this card means the 6 of Cups. I'm just really curious to see the themes of this deck, the messages, what this deck has to say, and how come it's so different from other typical tarot decks. So I'm not surprised that I'm drawn to this now as opposed to in the first like 3 years or first 5 decks, you know, that I bought while learning tarot. Yeah, so that's one deck there, the Spectral World Tarot. Another deck I bought recently is the 1909 RWS. It's basically a Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, but Sawyer Redux Edition, so drawn by Jamie Sawyer. It's funny because I know I was just saying I was tired of Rider-Waite-Smith decks, decks where it looks the exact same as a Rider-Waite-Smith. The only other Rider-Waite-Smith deck I've had is the Radiant Wise Spirit, and this one is pretty different because the lines are a lot cleaner. The colors are a lot cleaner as well. I don't know, the Radiant Wise Spirit has very like deep shading and very thick lines. This one the lines are thinner, like I mentioned. What is really unique about this deck is that Jamie Sawyer has drawn these mandalas, including the astrological signs and the elements in each card. So here we have, looks like Mars. Yeah, I think that's Mars. It looks like Pisces. There's a Roman numeral for 10. And let's see, here we have the Queen of Wands. We have fire. We have, I don't know what these symbols are. One of them is fire. I know some people think that these are really distracting. On camera, they might show a lot of contrast, but honestly, in person, looking at these under regular lighting here, it doesn't seem too distracting. The details are like there if I really want to focus on it, but when I'm not trying to focus on these mandala details, I don't really notice it that much. It just kind of blends into the background. Let's see, why did I buy this now though? Well, first of all, I saw that she was kind of discontinuing her decks, so I wanted to make sure I got one before this one ran out of print. I also think it's just nice to have a Rider-Waite-Smith reference, and I think I wanted something with just better colors than the Radiant Wise Spirit. So yeah, honestly, that's all I got to say about that one. Let's see. Another deck I've got is the Architect's Tarot. This one I was influenced by Laura at Aquamarine 18. This one is still in order because I haven't shuffled it yet. But this one is definitely very fascinating to me because I really like the theme that comes through this deck. It's all architect themed. Don't ask me to describe that more because I don't have really the words to describe that more. I think the aesthetic, the vibes are really, really cool. It looks really clean. The lines, the angles, the coloring, it all just looks really clean, very muted, not too garish. Also, since this is a deck that is drawn by a man instead of a woman, I feel like there are just different things that I can learn from art drawn by non-women, because a lot of the art that I have, a lot of the tarot decks that I have are depicted or drawn by women. This is not as beginner friendly or as intuitive, so I understand why like I wouldn't have bought this in my first 5 decks. But yeah, now again, I'm just at a point where I just want something different. I want something that makes me think a little bit more. I want something that is not too obvious what at first glance, like what the card means or what it's depicting. This is the 4 of Wands. Like, what does this mean? I'm so curious. What does it mean? So that's the Architect's Tarot. This one is very deep and very shamanic, and the imagery might be a little bit weird or uncomfortable, so be warned. This one is the Story Medicine Tarot, the Seaweed Sisters installment. This one I bought secondhand for a pretty good price because it's selling for like over $100. I got it for $75 US. I looked at a walkthrough of this, and for some reason I just felt like I just really wanted to take a look at this and give it a try. The only thing I've done with this deck so far is put it in order and kind of look at some of the imagery. But as you can see, the imagery is very, very different from some of my first 5 decks. I admit I know very little about what or who shamans are, what the word even means, what they do. Just something very deep and wild and definitely uncomfortable about this deck for me, but I'm really, really intrigued. This is the closest to like a shamanic or a religious deck that I would consider getting. Definitely noticed like my own discomfort around some of these images, but it's discomfort in a way that I'm really curious to keep learning about and keep unlearning, I guess. I think the discomfort for sure is like seeing bodies that are not like stick thin. And I see this as a thin person. Like, I get it. There's too many skinny people in decks, not enough like body diversity and plus size bodies. Also the nudity, of course. Like, I don't see nudity in a lot of my decks, and the nudity is another aspect of like foreign uncomfortableness. These have the little inscriptions or kind of affirmations, little words down here. 9 of Wands, we are those whom came before, roaring green fire in our belly, blood and soul. Some of these kind of make sense to me at first read, some of them kind of don't. This is not like a casual light reading kind of deck. This is not a cozy deck. This is like a deep thinker, a deep ponderer kind of deck. Yeah, dude, this is just so different. Like, can you imagine the person who once bought like these cute little pandas, like now this? Dude, the contrast, the difference. I'm surprised too. I'm surprised how different, the different directions life takes us in, right? And ending on sort of a lighter note, let's see. We've got the Modern Love Tarot by Ethne. So this one I wrote off for a while because I was like, modern decks, not really into. I really like the body diversity and the skin tone diversity in this deck. the age diversity too. I've mentioned in a few videos how I don't like modern decks because I don't like when they're too specific. I think a few of these cards might fall into that like too specific category, but nonetheless, there's just something about this deck that I'm kind of intrigued in. This card kind of bothers me because a lot of these other cards are like people oriented and modern themed, and this one is just there's really no modern scenery in this. This card might be an example of a card that is like too specific or too modern for me, but I'm still curious to give it a try. I don't know, for some reason I just feel like I want to have this deck and give it a spin. Just add it to my general history knowledge of tarot. They kind of look like oil paintings. I wonder if that's the medium that this artist used. But anyway, that's the Modern Love Tarot, another latest 5 purchase. It's really cool looking back at these first decks though and seeing how far I've come in my tarot journey and just seeing what I'm into now. Just how cool, right? How cool. So that was a look at the first 5 and the last 5 in my tarot collection. It's pretty interesting to look at the decks that I was first drawn to when I first started, like 3 years ago, versus the decks that I have now and that I'm trying to explore and connect with now. It's kind of like comparing your personality, your classes, your friend groups even from your freshman year to your senior year of school. Even though I showed the first 5 decks that I bought that I still have and read with, there's a lot of decks that I also bought in those first few months of learning tarot that I have since rehomed and sold off. I actually did make a whole video about these decks that I sold and moved out of my home. I'll put the video on the screen so you can click that if you're interested. Besides that, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Bye!